next speaker needs very little introduction, not least as a Longevity Forum founder and senior member, and that we heard from him earlier as well in the day. But Andrew Scott is a professor of economics as well at the London Business School, and you'll all know his award-winning book, 100-Year Life, which is more accolades than I need to run through. Interestingly, in my research also discovered he's also on the advisory board for the Cabinet Office Honours Committee, which I guess has made you quite busy of late with a lot of departure honours lists, but I don't think we'll need to run into that today. Here for all of your expertise as co-founder of the Longevity Forum, a particularly warm welcome for Andrew Scott.
Thank you, Wilfred. And luckily we don't do the political honours, which is a great relief. We can focus on the scientific ones. So I've got the timer running, so I better make a start. So I'm going to talk about health trends in England. Actually, some research I've been doing with a research assistant called Jonathan Old, which seems to be the best example of nominative determinism I've come across. So it's joint work with him. And really, it's about looking, if I think about how I think about longevity, I said this morning, it's about malleability. It's about changing how we age, both in terms of our underlying health, our underlying mortality, but also our behaviors. And that's been the theme, of course, running throughout the day. So it's looking at, are we aging differently? Now, the most obvious thing, and of course that's in the title, The 100-Year Life, is that life expectancy is increasing. So one way in which we're aging differently is changing in mortality trends. So here we've just got the mortality risk for 50-year-old upwards. So this is the probability or the risk of someone dying in a year at different ages. And of course, aging is about that mortality risk increasing every year. But this was the mortality risk in 1922. This is it in 1965. That's the year I was born. And this is it today, 2020, the last year. So that's a year affected by COVID. But you can see, wow, we really are aging differently. The risk of death is significantly less, which is why we're living longer. And Kelly gave us some great numbers about people's expectations of living to 100 or not. But whether it's 100, even the fact 14% of people think they might, we have to prepare for these long lives. But the big issue is, are we better in terms of our health? Because, of course, what this means is your probability of becoming old has never been greater. And so we have a new health challenge in society, which is to age well. So the really key question is our health better? Are we aging differently? That's what I want to try and show you some results on that one. Now, it's a complicated one because, of course, there's no one measure of health. There's kind of an obvious way of measuring mortality. Are you alive or are you dead? But when it comes to health, it's much more complicated. And there's also a lot more ambiguity. It's clear that we're aging better in terms of mortality, but what about health? So there's a thing called the English Longitudinal Study of Aging. It covers 18,000 people in England. It's every 2 years. It starts in 2002 to 2018. And what I'm going to show you is looking at that study, are there changes in our health? And the focus is a measure called frailty. Now, in this English longitudinal study of aging, they ask lots and lots of questions. So they ask things like, do you have trouble walking 100 meters? Do you have trouble lifting heavy weights? Can you get dressed yourself in the morning? They also ask things like, have you had cancer? Do you have diabetes? Do you have dementia? A whole range of questions about your health. They also ask you to record your health on a scale of 1 to 10. There's questions about memory recall. You'll be given 10 words and then asked to repeat as many of them as you possibly can. Do you know the date? Do you know the Prime Minister, etc.? So there's a range of questions. And if you answer yes to any of these questions, that's going to score you 1. If you score 0, nothing. So the low score is good here. And over these 50 questions, you take an average. And of course, the worst you can have is 1. So you've answered yes to all the questions. So you've got a problem on every single one of them. And the best you can get is 0. So this is the data for frailty for females and males. The blue shows you the interviews in 2002. The red shows you in 2018. So there's lots of things we can do with this. We can start, these are just averages. But first of all, you can see aging. You can see that frailty increases on average. And if you look at this frailty index, we age at about 3%, 3 to 4% a year. So your frailty index on average, and averages are very misleading, increase by 3 or 4% a year. That's about the same as Europe, slightly better than America, where frailty increases about 5% a year. But there's also lots of other differences here. For instance, this is the averages, but there are big differences based upon wealth and based on income. Education has a huge impact, as we were talking about levelling up. So if you leave school at 16 compared to someone who leaves school at 18, when you are after the age of 50, it's like sort of a 7-year effect on your frailty. So a 50-year-old leaving school at 16 has the frailty of a 57-year-old leaving school at 18. If you go to tertiary education, if you finish college, university, it's a 13-year gap. So a 50-year-old leaving school at 16 has the frailty of a typical 63-year-old college graduate. There are big regional differences. Living in the northeast adds sort of 6 years to your frailty score. So lots and lots of differences, but I'm also particularly interested in whether we are aging. Oh, sorry, this is showing you the difference from our estimates of someone in the southeast with high wealth who has a college degree compared to someone in the northeast with low wealth and left school at 16. So this is the frailty of someone in the southeast, high wealth, high education, and how it increases. And you can see it's pretty stable from 50 to 70 and then starts that increase. But this is what's happening to someone with lower education, lower wealth in the northeast. This is that levelling up agenda that we talked about. This is about that health inequality. And, you know, there's lots of things to focus on this. One is the urgency of tackling these inequalities. But the other thing is just to recognize the malleability of age, which is so key to how we think about longevity. And we have an aging society, we think about end of life, we think about aging as being fixed. This tells you that aging is malleable and can be influenced. So on that issue of malleability, are we aging better? So the good news is, yes. So what I find when I look at this is, roughly speaking, every year, every cohort born 1 year later has a sort of frailty level 1% lower than the previous year. It's quite high. So if you look at these forecasts, this is the frailty projection of a female born in 1930. This is what their frailty was at age 50, and this is roughly, because born in 1930, they're now quite old, you've got, this is how they're tracking out. This is then someone born in 1940, 1950, etc., and the bottom line is someone born in 1970, and you can see really, impressive improvement. We are, on average, aging better. This is the frailty profile of the most recent cohort. This is the frailty profile of older cohorts. So we are better in the way we're aging. Really good news. Life expectancy is increasing. Healthy life expectancy is increasing too. However, you can also see that the rate of improvement is slowing down. So that it looks, and this is all pre-COVID, literally we haven't got data covering COVID for this yet, but we've got a slowdown in this rate of improvement. So it might have been increasing, but now it's reached static. And Andy was talking about how important health is to work. If we're trying to raise the state pension age, then we've got to have people healthy to work after 60, 66, 67. But actually, if you look at the labour market, people start to withdraw from the age of 50. And that's the really big challenge we've got to work on. We've got to make sure that people have their health, and also within their family there's better health. They don't have to give up work for caring. So there has been progress, but it looks like it's coming to a halt. Now, this isn't really a prop for me, not for me to try and explain it to you. If you look at these different measures of frailty, you can split them into 5 components. How mobile and capable people are. These are activities of daily living. Can you look after yourself, cook for yourself, get washed and dressed, etc. This is, are you suffering from mental health, depression? Conditions is your underlying diseases, cardiovascular, cancer, etc. And then the last one is around cognitive functioning. It's about dementia, memory recall, etc. And it's this line that is my prop here. Basically, the more stars there are, the bigger the effect. The more negative the number, the better it is, because this is the rate of improvement in frailty. But what this punchline is from this chart here is that we have seen improvements of about 2% a year in mobility across cohorts. We've seen improvements in assisted daily living activities of about 2.5% a year. We've seen some improvement in depression of around about 1% a year. We've seen improvements about 1.4% a year in cognitive functioning, but hardly anything in terms of underlying disease conditions. In other words, what we're seeing in terms of people's health is that we've got ways of keeping people more mobile, and people may themselves be more mobile too. We have ways of increasing their functionality on a daily level, making it easier for them to look after themselves. Thankfully, some, but less improvement in depression. We've got improvements in the incidence of dementia. This is probably a lot to do with things like education. The older people now are much more educated than the past cohorts. But the underlying disease conditions, very little signs of change. Now, to the extent to which underlying disease conditions are affected by our behavior, like exercise and diet, it suggests that any gains we've got have been offset by deterioration in our behaviors. But it also, of course, points to the importance of geroscience, because if we really are going to age better, we've seen improvements in terms of the environment and behavior in lots of things. They seem to be coming to an end, and still we've really got these underlying disease conditions that need to be the focus, which will fit into some of the geroscience contributions we have later. So, I have overrun, but let me just wrap up. Good news, signs in England we're aging better in terms of frailty. Bad news, the rate of progress is slowing. Huge differences across countries. We need to focus on levelling up and inequality. If you look at the differences across regions, it's not so much in the averages, it's in the tails. It's the extreme outcomes that really drag down some of the regions that I've singled out as being weak. Very little improvement in underlying disease conditions, so a big bet has to be made on geroscience. If you look at the main cause of frailty for people in their 50s and 60s, it's actually depression. It's mental health. If you look at the main cause of worsening frailties in the 50s, in the tails, it's about mobility, diseases in the 60s, and then mobility again in the 70s. So I just conclude, what have we seen? Aging is malleable. Given the change in life expectancies, aging well is the most important health task we face, and we have a lot of work to do. Thank you.